Basket weaving goes pretty far back into the past of humans. We have been doing this for eons, and the Egyptians, while they used reeds from the Nile, we're going to use something called coiling core. And coiling core is the white stuff that's in your supply pack at home, and it's got a foam center and some fibers wrapped around the outside to make it look like a little cord, but those fibers do fray. So what we have to do is we have to make an aglet. If you've seen Phineas and Ferb, you likely know what this is, but it's kind of the plastic end of your shoelace that keeps your shoelace from fraying. If you've ever lost an aglet off of a shoelace, you know exactly why an aglet is important. But we need this right now because we need the end of our coiling core to stay intact and not fray. So wrap that masking tape pretty tightly around the end. And as you can see, I have wrapped both ends of my coiling core. You don't have to do this, but this is what it should look like. And then you're going to take your scissors and you're going to cut from the bottom right corner of that masking tape to the top left corner to make a tapered end. Again, the tape or the aglet that we just made will keep the cord from fraying into 15,000 pieces. And once we have that, we can actually start our basket. Get your yarn of choice that you want the base to be colored as, and this is called a skein of yarn. Not a ball of yarn, a skein of yarn. But take maybe an arm length or two and cut it off. You don't need a whole lot. And what you're not going to do is you're not going to place this along the side toward the end. If the end of your yarn and the end of your cord are matching up, that's a problem. Instead, you're going to aim it the other way toward the longer end of the coiling core and begin to wrap it. And keep your wrapping pretty tight. You want it to be seamless. You don't want to see any white in between your wrapping. Keep the tension. This will make your hand cramp a bit. But wrap an inch or two and then kind of bend it to test and see if you can see any white spaces in between them. And this is an example of what not to do. Look at those white spaces. This sucks. So don't do that. And if you do have that, unwind it and then start wrapping again. Don't go too far with this, but you do need to be able to bend this into a horseshoe. And I wrapped a little bit too far, so I'm going to undo a bit and then bend this with a decent amount of pressure. Now those white ends should match up so that your yarn falls in a perfect line. And then you are going to pinch it and wrap both of them. This will create almost a little loop at the end, and the smaller the space in this loop, the better. I left mine a little larger than I would prefer, just because I wanted you guys to be able to see this in the video. And again, it makes your hand cramp something awful, so sorry about that, but getting started is always the hardest part of this project. But you're almost going to make like a little horseshoe, little noose, and I have a little white spot right there. So I'm going to shove my yarn from one side with my nail and just kind of arrange that so that it's hidden again. And once you have this, we have to thread our needle. And threading a needle with yarn is not as simple as just shoving the end through the eye hole there. So you need to take your yarn in your fingers and pinch it around the side and then press it through. You press that little bent part of the yarn, not the end, because yarn is made up of 3 individual pieces of fiber. So it's hard to get through that tiny, tiny hole. Once you have your needle threaded, you are going to wrap about an inch down the cord. An inch might be a bit generous, half inch might be preferable. Do not go further than an inch at the very least. But then you should be able to bend that horseshoe around just like this. So you can kind of see this is where we have to make an important choice in this project. You have to choose which kind of stitch you want to do in order to hold your basket together. On the left, we have a basket that is made using the figure 8 stitch, and on the right we have a basket that uses a standard stitch. The standard stitch is more visible and creates a weaker basket, but the figure 8 stitch creates a firmer and more pleasing basket because you can't see that stitch, it's kind of hidden. With color changes you can kind of see it, but overall you can't see the actual texture of the stitch. So we're going to start out by going over the standard stitch. So again, easier, less hassle, but weaker and more visible. If your yarn is on the outside coming up, you place that needle through the cord next to it and just wrap it around. And you do this twice. Every single stitch you make in this basket, always stitch twice. Always, always, always. Stitching only once can create a very, very weak basket. Honestly, some people do 3 or 4 stitches. That might be a bit much depending on what you're doing, but 2 at least is a good number. Now, as for our figure 8 stitch, which is less visible and stronger, but harder to perform, if you have your thread going through the bottom, you haven't brought it up around the side yet. If you come back up through the top from the other side, and then pull it tight, and then press it down in between the 2 coiling cords that you just placed. So see, it's kind of like looped around there. So the space where it overlaps is hidden in between the coiling cord. So I'm going to pull that tight again, line it back up. You have to maintain a bit more tension with this one, and I mean with all of your stitches you should maintain tension, but then you just wrap it around once and then do it again. So back through that space, up through the bottom, back through that space again, and then pull it tight and wrap around, and then keep going. So if you ever run out of yarn, which will happen, or if you need to change your colors or anything, I don't want to see any knots tied. All you have to do is take another piece of yarn, lay it parallel to the tail of the piece of yarn that already exists, and then just wrap it around both of them. The tension of the yarn will keep them in place, and you'll be able to hide it and cover it. So once I have that started, I'm going to thread my needle again. Back through the bottom, coming up between the 2 sandwich cords toward me, and then wrap around the outside and pull tight, and then we do it again. Now notice that once I start getting some layers of cords here, my stitches don't go through the middle circle. Stitches only go around the cord directly next to them. So if you have 4 or 5 rings here, those stitches aren't traveling to the middle circle. That's not how this works. It only attaches to the cord directly next to it. So see, didn't put it through the center there, put it through the second one. And then just keep going. But rinse and repeat, maybe measure out an inch, half an inch, do your stitches as you need to. You can keep them even, you can vary them. If you're doing the standard stitch, I don't recommend varying your distance. Try to keep them even, because otherwise those will show up and it will look very, very ugly and distracting if you have just 1,000 stitches in one spot and no stitches for a stretch of distance here. So try to keep them even. The S stitch is a little easier in that regard because you don't really have to worry about spacing your stitches unless you're changing colors between layers, in which case, maybe. So let's talk about building your walls. Like, the rest of the basket is literally just that. So building your walls, meanwhile, is honestly pretty simple. So here I'm changing colors as I build my walls, but you can see that this basket is very tall and it has a shape, and you are required to have a shape with your basket. But I'm going to keep wrapping for a little bit, change that color. Again, the tension is the only thing holding this yarn in place, and that's okay. Keep a good, firm hold. So when it comes time to actually attach this, I'm going to set the cord on the inside edge because my basket is starting to aim inward. So I'm setting my cord on the inside edge of the cord beneath it, and then I stitch it. But always kind of overshoot it, because when you stitch it, it'll try to straighten it and kind of correct its placement. Don't let it do that. So always push it a little further than it needs to be toward the inside or outside, and you'll be fine. But if you're building a shape outward, set that cord on the outside edge of the one below it. If you're building it in, set it on the inside edge. Think of it almost like a set of stairs or a really weird escalator. But that's it. That's all you do. You guys are required to have at least an interesting pattern in this and some handles and or a lid, but those are constructed the exact same way as this. A lid is just an upside down base with some straight walls, and handles are just cord that is spaced out and kind of bent a bit and secured on both sides, but no stitches in the middle, so the handles kind of stick out. Like, that's really it. Look up some ideas online if you'd like, but don't copy anything. But come up with your own interesting basket and plan a nice pattern and really put the effort and time into this. This takes time. I will be around in class to help you guys. I encourage you to watch this video repeatedly. There will be timestamps in the description of this video in case you need to jump to a specific part, like if you need to re-reference the figure 8 stitch or the standard stitch and watch how it's done again. So keep an eye out in the description for stuff like that. We will be starting this tomorrow in class with some basic planning and a sketch for your ideas and some research, so come prepared to do that. Good luck, everybody!